Almost 23 years ago, I married a Southerner. At the time, we lived in New Jersey, so I really didn't know what I was getting into. I certainly didn't know that 5 years later we would be moving to Georgia. I remember being pleasantly surprised when we first got there. Strangers said hello and smiled all the time. I remember being shocked and amused when the weather guy on the local TV station told everyone they'd better be sure to take their umbrellas to church tomorrow morning. Really? Everyone goes to church so much like the weatherman tells you to take your umbrella? Yeah, you bet they do. In fact, I soon realized that the first thing Southerners want to know about you is what church you go to and who your family is. I used to be alarmed when new acquaintances asked me, "Who are your people?" Because I was afraid that I would give the wrong answer and nobody would be my friend. But gradually I realized that what Southerners are really trying to figure out is if you could possibly be related in some way. So if someone asks you, "Who's your daddy?" they're trying to discern whether you might have gone to the same school or the same church, whether you might know some of the same people, or maybe even if you might be kin. It works in the third person too. "Tell me who she is," one neighbor might say to another. And the reply, as Jim Hudnut Boimler once explained, might go something like this. "Well, she's the widow of a minister from up north." Where up north doesn't matter because, it's the north. But her first husband was the pastor of First Church, Little Rock, and you probably know her daughter, Sarah Jane, who teaches nursery school here, except she goes to Edgefield Methodist Church. If the whole world were Southern church people, says Hudnut Boimler, we would never have needed Facebook. I was taken aback by all of this at first, but now I wonder whether the Southern preoccupation with where you come from isn't so strange at all. I mean, you think about Ancestry or 23andMe, DNA tests, or the Henry Louis Gates program, Finding Your Roots. We all want to know where we've come from, who we are, how we're related, what our stories are. I think that's what's going on in the reading that we heard from Genesis. The very beginning of the Bible gives us not one, but two stories, as you know, of how we all came to be. It's what's called an etiology, not a history per se, but a story that somehow expresses the truth of how we got here and why we're the way we are. I think of the biblical creation stories a little like Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories. You remember tales like how the leopard got its spots, or how the camel got its hump, or my personal favorite, how the crab got its claws. The Genesis stories go way beyond leopards and camels and crabs, however. In Genesis, we hear about the very beginning of everything. And the beginning of everything is water. Even before God made anything, the Spirit swept over the waters. Then, as soon as God had a little light to work by, God made the skies and the seas and the rivers that gave water to the green, green earth. The water flows all the way through the biblical witness, from Eden to Noah to the Red Sea, to Jacob's well and Shepherd's streams, to the River Jordan and the Sea of Galilee, to the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, that flows from the throne of God. The water that begins in Genesis flows all the way through Revelation. The reading from Revelation is a different kind of story from the one in Genesis, though. If Genesis is etiology, this is, as you know, eschatology. Not a story of our past, but a vision of our future. As you know, John uses sometimes wild, sometimes poetic language to tell us that what God has in store for us is beyond our imagining. He cannot fully describe what he sees, not really, and so he tells us what he can. When God's future comes, our future, all creation will become new. The sea, long a biblical symbol for chaos, will be no more, because all shall be well. We will not go to heaven because heaven will come to us. Indeed, the dance floor of heaven will come crashing down to earth. God will make a home for us, with us, forever, and all our yearning will cease. All those who thirsted so long for justice will drink from the spring of the water of life, their thirst quenched at last. Now, some say this vision makes us complacent. Some say this vision makes us sit around and wait for the kingdom to come. Some say that believing in the coming reign of God keeps us from working for justice now. But the truth is, it is John's vision that keeps us alive, John's vision that keeps us going. John's vision that gives us enough hope to act out that realm of justice here and now. It is John's vision that calls us to an all-day, everyday rehearsal for the kingdom of God. Tom and I live in Cambridge, a small town on the eastern shore of Maryland, where there are two kinds of people, the from-heres and the come-heres. The from-heres can trace their family roots back for generations. They are farmers and watermen, teachers and tradespeople. They have lived side by side for centuries. They are a tight-knit community, and they look out for their own. The come-heres tend to be people sort of like us, well-educated professionals who lean left, and by either grace or good luck are drawn to the beauty and tranquility of the place. There's another divide among the from-heres, though, but people don't talk about it very much until lately. Half the town is white, half the town is African American. Some of our town's black citizens are descended from enslaved people who used to work the land. And some of the town's white citizens are descended from the people who used to own those slaves. Beside the county courthouse stands a brick platform constructed on the spot where humans were bought and sold. Next to it is a plaque bearing the image of Harriet Tubman, who was born just a few miles down the road and who rescued her own cousin from slavery just after she was auctioned off on that very site. A little more than a year ago, a crowd gathered at the courthouse, some black, some white. People told stories and sang songs. African Americans who were descended from people who had been enslaved talked about their ancestors and about how proud they were of their heritage. A black woman who happens to be our beloved mayor and a white man told how their families were linked through both slavery and kinship, how they discovered they were related through DNA testing. They call each other cousins now. They then took turns speaking the names of their relatives who had been enslaved. Then a woman who had discovered that she was descended from a slave-holding family in our county stepped forward to honor the people her family had enslaved by reading their names. Not their original names, of course, but the only names she had: Abraham, Beck, Isaac, Seal, Sylvia. On she read, 29 names in all. Others also remembered people whose names were unknown, people recorded only as one male 23 years old, or nameless child. It was a remarkable thing to do, especially in this town. There they were all together, remembering and speaking about where they had come from. The pain and the pride, the shame and the sorrow. And by doing so, together, they acted out their hope of what will someday be. They were a sign of the coming reign of God right there in Dorchester County. My friends, whenever we gather to worship, we do the same thing. Please don't forget that. We remember the suffering of the past. We lament the pain of the present. But we also proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ, that life defeats death, that joy crowds out sorrow, and that grace heals all wounds. We come together to pour water, washing away the grief of humanity. We are submerged in an ocean of mercy. And we gather around this table to meet the risen Christ who will one day welcome us all to the marriage supper of the Lamb. So come to the table. Come to receive grace upon grace, flowing up from the river of the water of life, an unending spring. Come to proclaim in every way that you can that the kingdom of God is on the way.